Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Policy Panchayat. We are resuming after a bit of a break that we had, and today we have a very special guest, someone that I really look up to, and I'm very fond of. He's a former LAM fellow, Rohit, and of course he's had a very illustrious career in the broader government affairs, public affairs sort of a space. I let him introduce himself, and we have a very exciting conversation lined up. Right, there's a ton that I wish to discuss today. So thank you again for joining, and Rohit, thank you so much for taking out the time. If you could just start with a brief introduction about yourself.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, so a little bit about myself. I am currently leading the public affairs for Zoom in India. I've had corporate affairs experience for close to 8 years now. Started with the LAM fellowship, of course. That was how I ended up being in policy. And I have my undergrad in journalism and mass comm. So that's a little bit about me and very, very briefly of what I've done so far.
No, awesome, man. Again, as someone who's just done undergrad in mass comm, I think this is, there has to be something structural. The number of people with a journalism background that I find in policy,
Right.
right? But maybe there's something we could take up with.
Very
I would,
limited though.
yeah, right. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's maybe
yeah.
something structural. But nonetheless, I would again, just maybe request you to expand a bit more on that in the sense, just, why don't you tell us more about yourself and your career journey thus far, right? Like, how do you discover policy and how do you just get started here?
Sure. So for me, policy has been a chance upon discovery, to be honest. I never thought I would be in policy. I remember right after my undergrad, I wanted to be a journalist and I almost got started with the newspaper as well. But I had also applied for LAM fellowship. And again, as I said, it was a chance upon discovery. I ended up seeing one of the LinkedIn profiles where someone said LAM fellowship. I went to the website, looked at it, and thought it is interesting. Never really thought I would get through because the kind of people who were fellows were, they were coming from some of the best universities, had some of the best
Yeah,
experiences, and I was just
yeah.
right out of college. And never thought I would get into it. But lo and behold, I somehow did. And that's where I think the public policy journey started. And the 1 year in the fellowship, I think, was an eye opener on so many levels because you get to see policy firsthand, not just how it is getting drafted, but
Yeah,
since you're working with a member of parliament, you're also seeing some parts of the implementation as well. And the fact that you're sitting in an MP's office, you get to interact with civil society, you get to interact with bureaucrats, you get to
yeah,
interact with other politicians. So just gives you a very nice 360-degree view of what public policy is.
yeah,
And I think that's where I decided, okay, maybe
yeah.
public policy is the way to go, and stayed with my MP for another 6 months. And after that, I ended up joining corporate public policy, and there was a specific reason for it. I wanted to learn much more about business economics slash finance. And of course, I had a huge interest in policy and doing, research. And I wanted to do research which is more practice oriented. Like you do research with an idea to
Yeah,
find
yeah,
solutions. So I think that somehow resulted in my going into corporate public policy. So I was with this consulting firm, which was also a law firm as well. So, very interesting experience there. As a general consultant in public policy, working across healthcare, education, environment, telecom, technology, infrastructure. So ended up getting exposed to a lot of sectors in those 6 7 years of work. And yes, then that's how I ended up at Zoom, because I realized technology is that one area where I have a major interest in, and also an area which I had not explored as much as, say, I had explored healthcare or
yeah,
education in
yeah.
in my consulting experience. And that's how I ended up with Zoom. And it's been a year and a half, it's finishing close to 2 years now. And I mean, it's been an exciting journey. And not to mention, we as a country are also going through huge change in the tech policy landscape. So it's nice to be a small part of
Yeah.
many larger discussions which are happening in the policy.
Yeah, and very definitive discussions, can I put it that way, right?
Exactly.
For the population of the size and Indian market is big. Just building on that, Rohit, as you're describing, like, your journey in that sense, how have you also seen this particular space change and evolve in the last, especially 5-7 years that you have been in a very active participant in this space, right? In
Right.
terms of say, jobs, opportunities, or anything like in terms of skills or whatever.
So I think there's been a huge change in the last 6 years for sure. When I started in policy, there were only a handful of entities which actually offered you policy jobs, and it was still not a very structured field. So today you have policy entities across the aisle. You have policy entities in implementation. You have policy entities in research, advocacy, just doing like small parts of the public
Yeah,
policy
yeah,
ecosystem. You have sectoral policy firms, consulting firms. You have careers in corporates, and interestingly, in the corporate as well. Uh, when I started, it would be rare for anyone having less than 15 years of experience to get into corporate policy. But I think that has changed. In-house, a lot of companies are taking people now who are much younger, have limited policy experience. And I mean, you're one of them, and you started your work experience in through a corporate
yeah.
job. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of change because you have a lot of opportunities, and those opportunities are a result of course, a lot of people getting trained in the public policy degree over the years as well.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I mean, earlier it was just most of the MPP degrees were abroad. Now you have so many schools in India which are also doing public policy courses. So yes, so I think there's like a full ecosystem which has developed across the aisle, starting from 0 years of experience to any sector you're working into, the highest of the experiences that you can have.
I'm going to agree. I could not agree more, right? I think, at least to my mind, the question is that, and in the sense, have some of these opportunities come because of the amount of people that have gotten training here, right? Or are people getting trained because these, opportunities have come up? Like, I'm not sure, which is the causality.
I think it's both, because I think in India's case, particularly over the last many years, as the government started involving a lot of private sector, as the government started involving a lot of consultants for that matter, for every policy issue, for every policy discussions that is happening, it has definitely generated, that need to have policy experts
Yeah.
who can talk about any and every issue that the government is facing. So there's definitely the demand side push. That, of course, because you're having that need to engage with the government at a much larger basis, you also have training programs coming up. So it's definitely both of those things that's happening in India. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just building on the thought of, working with government and policy and at the intersection, what does government affairs, public affairs mean? If I can explain it to a layperson.
It's a huge, I don't think you can fit government affairs in one bucket,
Yeah.
because it could mean anything and everything from doing research for a particular issue that either an NGO that you're working in is facing, or the entity that you're working in is facing, to advocating for it, designing the programs, implementing the programs, working with a range of uh, stakeholders. And it's a jargon that we keep using all the time. But your stakeholders, including your NGOs, your government, your other third parties, it could be any and every number of people, associations, industry associations for that matter. So all of that encompasses government affairs, and each component is as critical as the final product that ends up coming out of all of these discussions and engagements.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, in fact, Rohit, because, even when I was Twitter for a couple of years, government affairs was practically, the kind of job that was there. And I think it's basically about like you presenting your viewpoints that of your employer, right? As a very legitimate
No,
stakeholder to a government, because
no.
you will get regulated as an entity. So you have, all the rights to
Yeah.
put forward your viewpoints on the very fact or the very law that you're about to, get
Yeah.
impacted by. Because every business operates
Yeah.
in an environment set up by the government. And so yeah, it includes everything that you said. Like it's very, very broad based in that sense. But what skills would someone need to work in such a role? I understand that there's research, right? And
Right.
maybe a bit of comms here and there, but what skills does someone need, and what kind of opportunities for impact as well that that such a role might provide to someone who's working here?
So I think it's a very sectoral thing if you really look at it. If you take government affairs as a sector, it would function slightly differently in, say, technology companies as against a healthcare company or an education company. Um, in most of the cases, you have to have excellent communication skills, which you've already mentioned, because you are communicating the needs of your technical departments. You're communicating, including legal department for that matter,
Yeah.
your product departments. So all of those technical inputs that are coming to you from multiple layers of an organization, you have to understand it, decode it, and formulate a language which is understandable to the government. And that involves communication skills, but at the same time understanding what the government really wants, and also understanding the broader landscape of the governance. So that's where I think having being clued into what the policy ecosystem is, what the politics around a specific issue is, I mean, that's an intangible skill, but that's a skill that is very critical because you're going there representing your employer for an issue. Research, of course, is core as well, because if you're drafting an argument, it cannot be just a simple argument not based on, in facts and figures. So you have to come up with all of those things. But a lot of times when you are in government affairs and you're working with the company, a lot of that job is actually also done by others. So you're basically overseeing that positioning. Not to mention, you need to be a multitasker. Again, an intangible skill, something that your MBAs also teach you. You need to be a multitasker because, again, you're doing a lot of activities in one go. You're not just engaging with your internal stakeholders, but you're also engaging with external stakeholders, and there are lots of developments happening at any given point. And I'll give you an example of what's happening currently. So there is data privacy, which is going on currently, for discussion. The bill was passed. Now the focus is on delegated legislation. This is just one task which is happening. Not to mention, there is a telecom regulator's paper on the over-the-top communication services. Now, that's a second task which is happening. Internally, you will have only so many resources to take opinions of, and you need to ensure that you use those resources at an optimum level. So you're working at multi-levels, ensuring prioritizing what is to be done now, what is to be done later. Can I have one conversation and be able to get answers for all the questions that I want? So it's a lot of planning, thinking. So you need to be very strategic in how you really think. Critical thinking really plays a huge role. So again, I think all of these are intangible skills. These are not hard-coded skills that you learn in schools, but
skills,
I think these are all the soft skills that you need to succeed in public policy as a career.
And just one thing probably that I could add to that, Rohit, is that we would often hear, at least while I was working, that there are only two teams which are public facing in a corporate environment like this: comms and policy. That's it, right?
Exactly.
In terms of facing external public stakeholders, right? Everyone else, including legal, right, never goes out and say. So in that sense, like talking with stakeholders external to the company and then coming back and explaining their positions to internal teams, be it engineering, marketing, or anyone else. That, I mean, that's a very critical, again, bridge sort of a role that we play. But
Exactly.
Agree. Yeah. Stupid question, but will it be accurate to say that if you work in a corporate, in a policy role, then basically you're in government affairs? Will that be a fair way to characterize it?
I mean, yes. I mean, if you're in corporate, in the public policy domain, I mean, in your government affairs, in the public policy vertical, so to speak, you are actually in government affairs because you are engaging with the government, if not every day, than when the issue, any issue that hits you. So
Yeah.
of course, yes, I mean, as corporate affairs as a sector as well. And I think it's a specific distinction which multiple companies make. So corporate
Yeah.
affairs a lot of times also involves communication. So that's when
Yeah.
you end up having public policy, government affairs, government relations, communication. So multiple sectors that come into corporate affairs as a whole. But again, I think it's a terminology thing, and it's
Yeah.
a very company specific thing as to how they really define it. But corporate affairs is basically I mean, government affairs form a huge part of the corporate affairs vertical for sure.
I'll tell you where I was coming from, Rohit, because from my limited experience of a couple of years in such a place, I realized that my role was mostly focused on partnerships, right? Especially with
Right.
non right. So in that sense, but
Okay,
I
in
agree with
that
you.
sense.
Yeah, but that's a very fair
So,
characterization.
no, so so I think it's, again, as I said, it's a very company specific thing.
Yeah.
If you're a smaller company, a lot of times the partnership work, which will technically be your CSR work for that matter, will also be taken care by, the public policy team. But as you go in
Yeah.
larger companies, you start having very structured profiles. So if you really go to Meta for that matter, you will have just one team looking at privacy. And that's a policy issue, and it's a policy team, but they are just looking at privacy. You will have one team which is just looking
Yeah.
at external partnerships.
Yeah.
You have one team which is just looking at internal stakeholder management. So I think it's a very company specific thing, and you know how much resources each company has
Yeah.
in terms of having as many roles as possible.
Yes, and especially Meta's policy team is, well, let's just say
And
large.
not just Meta. I'm
Yeah.
taking it from the healthcare experience for that matter. I mean, I remember working in this one of the largest HIV companies in the world. And they have, in government affairs, they have something called a global patient solutions team. Now,
Okay.
that team is basically an intersection of the sales team, the team which engages with the doctors, which is basically your training of the medical professionals, and public policy. But technically the category is your global patient solutions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very much dependent on what that company wants and what the goal of the company is and how they really want to achieve it. So you can cut and slice the role in any manner possible depending on the resources that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, right? And but if there's, maybe just as a food for thought, if there's, something that you could change about how this space is right now, right? About say the broader public policy and social impact space in India, right? What would that be?
I think we definitely need much more participation from the ground. A lot of times, most of us, and I think I'm also guilty of that, because you are constantly working in an echo chamber. You end up not taking the points of view of what is really happening on the ground, and I think that's where civil society plays a critical role. Not to mention having people in your team who are coming from tier 2 3 cities, who are coming from
Yeah.
colleges which are
Yeah.
not Ivy Leagues for that matter, who are coming from colleges which are just not IITs for that matter. I think that's
Yeah.
where you bring in diversity. So I think having that diversity in the workforce and also connecting with that, what's really happening on the ground, I think that's something we must change. I'm not really sure how we can change that, except maybe hiring more people which come from diverse backgrounds. But yes, I think that's where we're facing a major issue, and we end up having policies which are slightly lopsided
Yeah.
in their outcomes.
And in fact, maybe this is a bit of a personal opinion. You can tell me if you disagree or you agree with this, right? But I think a part of that, at least to begin with, will be about creating more awareness about public policy in general. People just don't know about policy in
Exactly.
India. I'll give you a very small example. I was in Sikkim for a couple of weeks. I was just working out of Gangtok, and I was in a hostel. A lot of people that I meet there were people who are traveling across India from different parts of the world, right? And anytime they would ask me, "What do you do?" and I would begin to explain, and they would just, snap, and I mean, they'll just stop me and they'll be like, "Oh, so you work in policy?" And for me, that was like, "Oh, you know about policy? That's great." Like that was always like a refreshing change, right? But it's very mainstream
Yeah.
for the rest of the world. Right? They know what
It,
public policy is. In India,
yeah. We don't. And
Yeah.
I mean, my parents don't.
Yeah,
I mean,
same.
it's been almost 9 years, and I think
Yeah.
every time I have to explain my job to relatives or people back home,
Yeah.
it's difficult because for most of them, they don't understand what you're really doing.
Yeah.
Also because they've not been exposed to that kind of jobs. So I think that's where you're right. We definitely need a lot of campaigning around it, lots of awareness around it as to what public policy really is. And public policy is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
as we've just been discussing, as a sector, it's huge.
Yeah.
And the opportunities that come with it are huge. But a lot of people don't end up knowing that. And I think that's also a reason why you don't also see a lot of diversity in the workforce as well.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, this is both a good thing and bit of an issue at this point, I think, at least. I broadly work in the career space, right, in policy, and I've noticed, Rohit, that at least in DU, the amount of awareness is insanely high. It's good,
Yeah.
right? People know about what policy is and all of it, but then it's just within DU and maybe a bit of Ashoka or something, not beyond that.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's just DU. So DU is, I
Yeah.
think DU is probably because you're sitting
Delhi.
in Delhi.
Yeah.
It's one of the top universities
Yeah.
in the country. So, and political science, history, economics, all your standard, base courses
Yeah.
which are required to get into public policy. I think there is a huge awareness among the law schools in the country as well. So
Agreed.
your top tier NLUs will definitely have a lot of awareness. Some of the IITs now have public policy courses, but again, it's in a quite upper level hierarchy, so to
It's an
speak.
elite and
It's an elite. Yes, I did not want to use the word, but it is
yeah.
an elite enterprise, and
Yeah.
we can't refute that. So
Agreed.
yeah, so we need to go down on the ground and offer opportunities, tell people what public policy really is and what is the career that you can make out of it,
Yeah.
and offer them opportunities, tell them this is what's really happening, and that's how we'll bring in more people again. But I think it's a long journey to reach there, and
Yeah.
I think you're doing great work in that. Just going out and reaching out to the masses and educating them what public policy really is.
And in fact, I think when I try and work on something like this, Rohit, my idea is that, okay, maybe we can't have everyone actively shaping policies. And to be
Of
fair,
course,
that's just how it is, right? But
of
can we
course.
ensure that as many people as possible feed their inputs into the way policy is shaped because it impacts them, right? And then they can be active
Yeah.
participants in that sense.
There's a really good example of it. I mean, if you really look at
Yeah.
Net Neutrality Campaign was a very ground up campaign
Yeah.
where you had voice from the masses, and kudos to a few NGOs, a few companies who really
Yeah.
went to town about it, explaining the issue, and decided that you need to bring in people. And I think your data privacy is exactly one of those issues. I mean, it is it's going to get impacted. I mean, everyone's going to get impacted by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you need people to talk about it. You need for people, if they don't want to participate, that's okay. But you need for people to understand what their rights are as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's also a role of public policy as a sector. So as you said, not everyone needs to actively participate or make it as a career, but
Yeah.
I think it's your right to know what's really happening in the broader public policy space, because that's how you also decide which governments you want to elect,
Yeah. Yeah.
which MPs you want to elect for that
Yeah.
matter, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a part of that broader rights and duties
Yeah.
discussion for citizens.
It just reminds me of, just today morning I was having breakfast. So we were just, discussing current affairs or something. And he happened to say the day courts are fixed in India, the judicial system is fixed in India. Basically, he was trying to say that, the day we can enforce contracts in this country, a lot of our issues will be solved, right? Because businesses can then, find it very stable, predictable, get into contracts and negotiate and whatever. Rule of law in that sense. Now, he's someone who has nothing to do with policy at all, right? He's just someone, who runs a business. But without realizing that he's actually talking about public policy, he fully realizes that, yeah, he's right. And so, and that just got me thinking that it impacts all of us every single day in like a number of manner, but we're just not aware that, okay, this is what this policy we're talking about.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, look at Ayushman Bharat for that matter. I mean, millions of people are enrolled in it. You need to know what your rights are.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
in that case, I find Delhi as a very good example of where citizens participate a fair bit.
agreed.
Because
Even in Bangalore,
um,
for example, yeah,
even in Bangalore, yes,
yeah,
Delhi, Bangalore, I think there are two cities where citizens participate a lot in the governance
civic,
ecosystem.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly. So civic engagement happens a lot. And that's how public policy, that's how good policies are shaped, because that's where you get the voice from the ground. And if you're not getting something, if you're not getting electricity on time, if you're not getting water on time, you know this is the mechanism through which I can complain. And if this doesn't work, there is a mechanism to
yeah,
go up. So all
yeah,
of these things form a part of public policy. And again, it helps you also get your rights as a citizen as well.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's a very fair way to put it, right? Are there any resources you would recommend for someone, who maybe just wants to learn more about policy or build a career, right? It can be resources as in anything, books, podcasts, essays, anything that you
Um,
feel someone should read.
I really think, I mean, in terms of the books, I really think you need to understand India's history from all possible perspectives. Because if you want to get into public policy, you'll always end up engaging with the political and the bureaucratic class.
Yeah,
And if you're doing that, you need to understand the ecosystem in which you're working. You can't be
yeah,
very and that means you're not just reading one perspective. You need to understand different perspectives. So which means reading all the good books that are there on public policy and on political history, political economy for that matter.
yeah,
I again, a few, I think I do follow like a few places. You have Cut the Clutter for that matter, which I think is
agreed,
very good in explaining certain
agreed.
issues.
Yeah,
And and I think it's a very good way of also understanding how a policy issue can be dissected. Every
yeah,
issue that, for instance, Shekhar Gupta talks about, it that's the sort of investigative technique you'll also need in your public policy career.
yeah, yeah.
That's how
Very
you'll succeed.
structural thinking in
So
that sense. Yeah,
very structural thinking for that matter, and the research that goes in it
yeah,
as well. Then I think reading papers is extremely reading media is very, very critical.
yeah,
And that means you're not just reading Indian media, you're also reading the perception of India in other media,
yep,
so that you also get a very good 360 perspective of how it really works out. So very brief example, in my journalism days, and I think that comes from journalism of reading papers. I used to read both Dawn, and which is a Pakistan's
yeah,
newspaper,
yeah, yeah.
and Hindustan Times or Indian Express for that matter, on
Yeah,
the same issue. And you see the diverse, like you see how both of them explain the issue. And then as a reader, it is upon you to decide who you want to believe or what do you really think. Because
yeah,
in policy, nothing is black and white, everything is gray.
yeah, yeah,
So you need to grasp what that gray is really about,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then work through it. So yeah, I would actually just recommend reading as much as possible. And of course, I think your website is doing an amazing job in terms of at least providing what the broader policy ecosystem is. You have CPR for that matter.
yeah,
You have platforms like CSIS. So
yeah.
there is absolutely no dearth of platforms which provide the kind of content that you need. But then again, I think it's a very it's the second step
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get into the sectors, so to speak. The first is building base of your political knowledge, building base of understanding what the country and the governance is all about, and then you can just go ahead with getting a little bit more specific in issues and trying to dissect what those issues and creating opinions on that.
couldn't agree more. Right? In fact, I mean, basic like just two pointers on that, which is yeah, I think if you're getting started, please learn more about the permanent state in India, which is a bureaucracy, and the temporary
Yeah,
state politicians, right? Who come and go.
exactly.
And I do think it's a journalism thing because I also read the Dawn and South China Morning Post daily almost. Like,
Of
yeah,
course, exactly.
I'm like,
I
okay,
mean,
I can
China
disagree,
issues if
but
you want to do.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
exactly. You can disagree, and
yeah,
there is absolutely no problem. You can disagree with all the coverage, but
yeah,
it's very interesting to see how they really portray the same issue,
yeah,
which is getting reported in a very, very different manner in India.
Precisely. Yeah, agreed. And maybe one record that probably I would add, and I feel it's a very foundational text, is In Service of the Republic by Professor Ajay Shah. I think it's a phenomenal
Yes, of
book.
course. Of
Yeah,
course.
it's
Professor
like
Ajay Shah is, I mean,
doyen.
he's done an
Yeah,
amazing work
yeah,
in so many years of his service. So yeah, I mean, again, there is absolutely no dearth of great content which is out there. There's this great book, something I'm reading called Caged Tigers, which
oh,
is
lovely book. I read it.
yes,
Yeah,
it's a lovely book. I mean, it's a great book. It talks about the governance ecosystem in a very nice manner. So again, if I mean, if you reach that point where you've crossed the basic functional text and
yeah,
understood what's basically happening, then you can start building on, have that building blocks through as much reading as possible. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's my favorite clip these days, Rohit. Say when I'm talking with my friends, right, and the government makes some choice or something comes up, and they're like, "Oh wow, I can't believe this is happening." And but sometimes I'm like, actually, the Indian government is very predictable. The Indian state,
they oh
like,
you know what's exactly
yeah,
when you're in
it's
public, because it's all about, like, I think again, it's not supposed to be just a public policy career thing.
yeah,
If you are a citizen who is generally aware and is actively taking part just by understanding what's happening around you, you will very easily predict what is
yeah,
going to come,
yeah.
because there is a pattern for everything. So
Precedent.
yeah, precedence for everything, exactly.
One last question:
Yeah,
any
of
advice
course.
for someone who's looking to build a career here? Anything?
I think I would just say that if you're just starting out, say in your undergrad, look out for as many opportunities to get practical experiences as
Yeah,
possible,
yeah.
because even in the best of the institutions, we are still very academically oriented. We are not a practice oriented, academia
Ecosystem
for
is it?
that
Yeah,
matter.
yeah,
Yeah, we're not. So the best thing would be for you to go out, find opportunities for internships as much as possible. Test, test, test. I think that's how, I mean, in my case as well, throughout my 3 years in undergrad, I probably
yeah,
must have done 6 internships, because that's how you figure out what you like and what you don't like. So I would actually just say, like, to go for practical opportunities as much as possible. Education is critical. It's great. Marks are great. But if you're just starting out, get to practice what you're learning. And sometimes even if you get like basic opportunities, it's okay.
yeah,
Even if
yeah,
you're just sitting in the office,
yeah,
observe
yeah,
what's happening around you, and you get to learn so much about any field that you're going in, and
yeah,
public policy, of course, more
yeah.
so. And yes, develop communication skills. And I think it's easier said than done, but yes, your debates, your declamations is definitely one way in the college to start with it. And I think, building a mechanism to do social networking, and I'm not saying getting on Instagram or Facebook for that matter, but building relationships with people is very critical. So working on those communication skills, empathy, understanding people is very, very important, because in public policy, it's your peers who will always help you. It's your peers who will be there with you in any sector that you're in. So you need
Yeah,
people to function. So maybe working on the social skills is
yeah,
is is critical as well. And you can be shy and still work on your social skills. So you don't
agreed,
absolutely need to be very out and about. So yeah, I
agreed.
think some broad ideas. So,
Couldn't agree more, Rohit. Like I tried my entire career, whatever little career I've had, to like what the 7 or 8 internships I did in college, in undergrad. That's it, right? In
exactly.
different cities, fields,
Exactly.
and this has been a very lovely conversation. Thank you so much for taking out the time. And for our
Always.
audiences, right? Please do drop in, your comments, feedback in the comment section below, and let us know who next we should get as a guest. We'll have Rohit's LinkedIn in the description, right? Feel free to reach out to him. He's exceptionally kind. He's always happy to chat and help out. Thank you again, Rohit, for taking out the time. Please take care.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.